Alright, YouTube, what's the word? We back at it again. No TikTok because TikTok sent me a violation last week when I had that up because what they say, buddy? Like you're not supposed to have something just being recorded and played. Like you need to be active in it, and they sense that. So, anyhow, so just YouTube, and we at it again revising some Bio Unit One. It's not Bio Unit One, Bio CSEC Bio Paper One, right? CSEC Bio Paper One.
Yeah, CSEC Bio Paper One.
Cool. So we're looking forward to that. What else I could say? Well, I told Miss I'm just gonna say hello and dive out. So, hello. Later.
All right, guys. So we basically gonna continue where we left off from last day, right? Because again, we have this paper to complete. I know I did say that I would be doing a third session next week, but something came up and I cannot do that third session next week. So today we're going to finish off this paper and then, look out on the Student Hubs and Mr. Springer's social media, and I will let you know when we could have another session, right? Or when I'm having another session. But today we're going to finish this one. And again, we're doing paper one questions. So it's multiple choice questions, and we're going to learn around the questions, which means that we're using the question to be able to revise. So if you're just here to get answers to memorize, I guess you could skip through the recording in the future, but we're here to revise, to learn, and also to get the answers, right? Because it's very important that we know why the correct answers are the correct answers, and also why the other options don't fit. Because if we get variations of the question, you should be able to pivot. Right? So I don't want you all just learning off the answer. So we got up to question 21 last day. So we're picking up with question 22, right? So item 22 refers to the following equation, which shows the oxidation of glucose in cells. So you have your C6H12O6 plus O2 to give you your CO2 plus H2O, right? Now, this isn't a balanced equation by no means, right? But it's showing that glucose plus oxygen is being broken down into carbon dioxide and water. If this equation were to be balanced, we'd have to put in some sixes there, right? So C6H12O6 plus 6O2 to give you 6CO2 plus 6H2O, representing respiration, right? Now, the energy released from the process above, what is the energy being used to do, right? So is it being converted into ADP, converted into ATP? Is it stored in a high energy bond in ADP, or is it going to be stored in a high energy bond in ATP? What do you guys think the answer is? Right? So I see in B is coming in the chat, right? And this question is one that's a little bit tricky, right? Because in respiration, we're releasing the energy from glucose and we're using it to make ATP. But ATP is made from ADP plus phosphate, right? So ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, right? So actually the easiest way to show this is the other way around so that it makes more sense, right? Let me just get this a little bit smaller, right? So it's ADP plus inorganic phosphate and energy to give you ATP, right? ADP stands for adenosine. It's adenosine with two phosphates attached, right? So that is where the diadenosine diphosphate, it has two phosphates attached, right? To make ATP, we're simply going to add a third phosphate to that using energy. So the energy from glucose is used to add that third phosphate group for us to end up with adenosine 1, 2, and we're going to have that third one there. So to get adenosine triphosphate, which is the 1, 2, 3 phosphate. So the energy is used to attach that third phosphate group. So the energy is stored in that bond. Now, once that ATP is made, then when reactions require ATP, you could then go ahead now and break that bond to release the energy for use. Why isn't it chat? We following? So what would the correct answer be now then? It will be D. It's stored in a high energy bond in ATP. Right? Item 23 refers to the following diagram of the respiratory system with some structures labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which of the labeled structures represents part of the rib cage? Is it going to be 1, 2, 3, or 4? So with the respiratory system, we have to know that it is going to facilitate. So the lung is the site of gaseous exchange, right? Where we're going to be picking up oxygen and giving up carbon dioxide. So it's an exchange between the blood and the air in the alveoli in the lungs, right? And the rib cage is instrumental in us being able to get air into the lungs. So it's a common misconception that when we breathe, that we suck air in that inflates the lung like a balloon, which is not really the case, right? So the life is at 3. Well, it was last week and this week, and we start at 3. So we just started, right? So yes, so we don't just suck air into the lung and then inflate it. Rather, we actually have to drop the pressure inside of the lungs that will cause air to flow into the lungs. And how we do that is by using the rib cage to increase the volume of the lung. So the rib cage and the diaphragm play extremely important roles in us being able to breathe, right? So the part that is pointing to the rib cage correctly, as you'll said in the chat, is going to be B, which is structure 2. But you know, while we're here, what is 1 pointing to? So we know that 2 is the rib cage. What is 1 pointing to? Yeah, you'll always know what the correct answer is. But let's lean around the question. It's not the spine. I can see why I would say that though. It does look kind of spinish, but it's actually the trachea or the windpipe, right? And the trachea is or commonly known as the windpipe. It is going to be held open by C-shaped rings of cartilage that keeps the airway open to get air to the lungs and back out easily without resistance to flow, right? So it's held open. So because most times, even if your parents say, you know what, every time I see you eating or you eat out this entire house, still, even if you eat to that extent, you are breathing more than you're eating. So therefore, the default system that is kept open is a respiratory system, and it's temporarily blocked off when you're swallowing food, right? 3 is pointing to what? So thinking about one time is going to be 3 and 4. Now, to be honest, I would have preferred if they were, you know, more particular with where the label lines were ending, right? But from what that looks like to me, I wouldn't say bronchioles per se, but I feel like it's pointing to the very end of it, which would be the alveoli, right? So either I think this is us learning around the question, right? So alveoli is fine. Even if you said lung, I think it also would be fine. To say bronchiole, if they were pointing to a part higher up on the branching, I would then say bronchioles. But alveoli or lung, I would go with if I had to label that, right? And then 4 is pointing to yeah, so it may be slightly unfair because, you know, it's not all the way zoomed in. But if you look at where that label line is ending there, it's closest to the end of it. So that's why I would say alveoli or lung. And 4 is pointing to the diaphragm, right? So when it's time for us to breathe in, the rib cage, there are muscles in between the rib cage, right? Muscles in between the rib cage called the external intercostal muscles, right? We're going to contract those to lift the rib cage up and out. And then when we need to inhale as well, we're going to contract the diaphragm to flatten it. So that's going to help increase the volume of our thoracic cavity, increase the volume of the lung, dropping the pressure in the lung that is going to cause air to flow from the atmosphere into the lung. And then when we need to breathe out, we relax those external intercostal muscles. Those are the muscles in between the bones of the rib cage. And then we're going to relax the diaphragm, which is going to spring back up into its dome shape, both of which are going to compress the air in the lungs, building pressure above atmospheric pressure, and air is going to flow out, right? So breathing is not as easy as it may seem. It's a play on pressures. We have to either drop the pressure below atmospheric pressure or increase the pressure above atmospheric pressure to get air into and out of the lungs. And the reason why we want to do that is to keep bringing oxygen to the gaseous exchange surface, which is going to be the alveoli. Why is in the chat? Which of the following is an effect of carbon monoxide found in cigarette smoke? And guys, if this is any question, if there is any question that comes in very, very subtle variations, it's going to be this one. They love to bring us smoking multiple choice questions, but sometimes they focus on carbon monoxide, sometimes they focus on tar. So you have to know be familiar with the effects of cigarette smoke on the respiratory system, right? So this one says, which of the following is an effect of carbon monoxide found in cigarette smoke? So is it going to be increased beating of the cilia? Is it going to be damage to the cells in the body causing cancer? Is it going to be reduced oxygen transport by the blood? Or is it going to be increased mucus production in the cells lining the respiratory passageways? So this question is definitely one that you want to pay attention to and read very carefully. So I seen B in the chat, I seen D in the chat. And what if I were to tell you that neither of those are the correct answers? Right, so I see in as Delia, right? I feel like Delia coming in with C being the correct answer on the first one, right? So carbon monoxide is a gas. Carbon monoxide is a gas. It's clear, it doesn't have an odor. You can't smell or detect it, right? But carbon monoxide, when it enters, so this carbon monoxide or CO, right? That is, once you inhale smoke containing that carbon monoxide, the thing about it is that within your blood, you have red blood cells. And red blood cells are packed with a protein called hemoglobin. And it's that hemoglobin, that red hemoglobin protein in the red blood cells that allows your blood to be able to transport oxygen, to get oxygen to all of the respiring cells that need it. However, that hemoglobin, it likes carbon monoxide more than it likes oxygen. So if it pulls up to the alveolus in the lung and there is carbon monoxide in the alveolus and oxygen in the alveolus, it's going to bind or pick up carbon monoxide instead of oxygen. So what that's going to mean is that the hemoglobin is going to be going around the body carrying carbon monoxide instead of oxygen, and therefore your cells that need oxygen for respiration is going to be lacking or depleting. So carbon monoxide reduces oxygen transport by the blood because it picks up the vehicles that oxygen should be riding in. Why is in the chat? There are different versions of this question that comes. So if it is that carbon monoxide will not have an effect on the increased beating of the cilia. The cilia that line the respiratory passageway is there to help clear away the mucus, right? But the thing is, tar that is also found in cigarette smoke, as it settles on the lining of the respiratory passageways, it actually traps the cilia so that the cilia is no longer able to clear away the mucus. That mucus is there to trap dust and bacteria, any bad things that may be in the air, to help purify it as it's going to the alveolus. So because you have the cilia being trapped, the mucus accumulates, and that mucus traps dust and bacteria, which becomes a nice, warm, moist environment for the overgrowth of bacteria and high risk of infection. So Increased beating of cilia will be more affected by tar in cigarette smoke rather than carbon monoxide. Damage to the cells in the body causing cancer. Tar actually contains a bunch of chemicals that are carcinogens. Carcinogens cause cancer. And the problem with exposure, problems with carcinogens is that exposure is the danger. The more you're exposed to it, the higher these chemicals, these carcinogens have at inciting or starting a cancer within the tissues nearby. So because the tar becomes trapped on the lining of the respiratory passageways, it's holding those carcinogens there against the cells of your respiratory tract, and therefore increases the likelihood of the development of a cancer, right? And then the D, which is increased mucus production in the cells lining the respiratory passageways. That happens when there are increased irritants or tar accumulating on the respiratory passageway. So this question, carbon monoxide, C is the answer, but there's a variation of this question that kind of pops up from time to time, which focuses on tar instead. So again, make sure and read this question very, very carefully. Then we have 25. Which of the following options best identify some of the transport substances in animals? Is it going to be, you have 1 amino acids, 2 hormones, 3 sucrose. So which is it going to be? 1 and 2 only, 1 and 3 only, 2 and 3 only, or 1, 2 and 3? What do you guys think it is? So we have B coming in. So B is 1 and 3 only. So you're saying that it's going to be amino acids and sucrose. But the thing is here, the question says to best identify, but it says transport substances in animals, right? So animals don't transport sucrose. Sucrose is made in the plants and transported in the phloem. If animals were to consume sucrose, they would digest it. Sucrase will break down that sucrose into the fructose and glucose that makes it up, because sucrose is a disaccharide, right? So we would never be circulating sucrose within our body. We would break it down in the small intestine from sucrose into glucose and fructose and move the glucose and fructose into our blood to circulate, right? So therefore, sucrase is never transported within animals. So any option with 3 is going to be out. So the correct answer here is going to be A. Why isn't it, Chad? Yeah, we had to know this. So sucrose is not sucrose. It's amino acids and hormones. Yes. Sucrose, no. Sucrose is for plants. 26. The activities 1, 2, 3, and 4 listed below are involved in the clotting of blood. Right? So the clotting of blood is very important because it's going to minimize blood loss as well as to prevent the entry of pathogens, especially when it's happening towards the outside of the body, right? So when you get a cut and bruise, you fall down. Some of us have some legendary scars. I've been telling my students about the big scar I have on my ankle from riding boxcat as a child, right? If you don't know what that is, like the live, I was spend too much time on the live telling that story, but needless to say, my brother get a relic for that, right? But either way, when we get cuts and bruises on the skin, the blood will clot so that we have the slowing down to the stopping of loss of blood from the body, and it's also going to dry out and form a scab, which prevents the entry of pathogens, which are microorganisms that can cause disease. But at this level, CSEC Bio, we need to be able to understand the steps in the formation of a blood clot. So step 1 they have there is that fibrinogen is converted to fibrin. 2, that blood cells are trapped. 3, that platelets are activated. And 4, that damage to your blood vessels. So which of the following correctly lists the sequence of activities? Ooh, the chat seemed to be a bit lagged. A disaccharide is a carbohydrate. So carbohydrates have 3 different classes. You have your simplest carbs, which would be your monosaccharides, which is just free saccharide units like your glucose, etc. Then you have your disaccharides, slightly more complicated, where you have 2 saccharide units bonded together via glycosidic bond. And then you have polysaccharides like your starch or your glycogen, which are many monosaccharides joined together which forms that's going to be a polysaccharide or known as your complex carbs. So when you're eating complex carbs, you're eating bread, you're eating pasta, you're eating dasheen, right? Your complex carbs, whereas your simpler carbs would be the ones that are sweeter, like your table sugar, sucrose, milk sugar, lactose, or even if you like, those powdered donuts, something I think that is like glucose powder on that. It's giving very, very sweet, and your simpler carbs, which tend to be sweeter, right, Sasha? So for this one, we think that it's going to be A, right? So this one, so the answer is not A. I've seen a couple A's in the chat, but this one is not A. The correct order is actually D, right? So I will go through why this happens so that we could fully explain the order in which it forms. So the first thing is that there is going to be some damage to your blood vessels, and damaged tissue within the body, it releases chemicals like a scream for help. So these chemicals are going to be released from the damaged tissue, and that is going to have twofold. It's going to activate your platelets that also release chemicals. So platelets are fragments of cells that are constantly in circulation within the blood, and it forms platelet plugs and handles small cuts and bruises, right? But if larger protection is needed and a full blood clot needs to be formed, it can also call for backup if the situation is beyond what it can handle, right? So damaged blood vessels release chemicals that will then activate your platelets. So your platelets, the formal name for your platelets will be your thrombocytes. So we have 4 being first, 3 being second, right? Now, the activation of the platelets causes a cascade of events to occur. There are multiple clotting factors within the blood, and the thing with it works like the domino effect or like a cascade effect, which means that the platelets become activated and they cause the activation of another enzyme. Then the next enzyme, once that becomes, so you're going to have a bunch of inactive enzymes in the blood, right? So activated platelets causes inactive enzyme to become active. And then this active enzyme could then convert another inactive enzyme to become active, right? So one activates the other, then that one could then activate the next one. So you need all of them in order for the clot to be able to form. Very importantly in this process is that you're going to have prothrombin in the mix, right? And that prothrombin is the inactive form. When activated, it becomes thrombin. And then that activated thrombin now can then convert the inactive fibrinogen into fibrin. This final product of fibrin is insoluble and forms insoluble fibers, and it forms a mesh, right? And then within that mesh, your red blood cells, etc., in the blood can become trapped to form the clot. So the fibrin is insoluble fibers. It's what stabilizes the clot. And then, so the fibrin forms, which is going to give us 3, and then it's going to trap the blood cells, 4. Once we have that happening, that is what leads to the slowing down and then the eventual stopping of bleeding. And then that clot dries out into the scab, which allows for healing to happen underneath. Why isn't it, child? So damage to the blood cells, release chemicals that will then activate the platelets. Then that will lead to prothrombin activating into thrombin that will then activate fibrinogen into fibrin, which will then lead to the blood cells becoming trapped, the formation of the clot, and then that would eventually dry out to form a scab if it's an external clot. Yeah. So again, you had to learn the steps in that to be able to know this one, right? 27, why is it difficult to develop a vaccine for the common cold? Is it that the vaccine cannot be developed for viruses, that the antigens on the common cold virus change frequently, the antigens on the common cold virus remain the same, or that human beings cannot produce antibodies for the common cold? This one is going to be B, right? So every year we work on the flu vaccine, right? But every year you have to take a new one. But why is that, right? So antigens are proteins on the surface, right, of the virus that causes the flu. However, though every time you get the flu, there's an opportunity for that virus causing your flu to mutate or change, which means that as that flu keeps spreading from person to person, and we know the flu in circulation right now is terrible. And to be quite honest, every flu since COVID to me has been just getting worse and worse, right? Because as it spreads, it mutates or changes, right? So when they make a vaccine, it takes a while to develop a vaccine. By the time they develop the vaccine, mass produce it, and roll it out, the viruses have had opportunity to change already, which means that flu vaccines aren't 100% protective, which means that even if you take the vaccine, it doesn't mean that you will never get the flu, which is not the case. A lot of us have taken the flu vaccine and still get the flu. But the benefit of it is that it's going to protect against some strains of the flu, not all, but some. So it's going to reduce the likelihood that you get the flu and even reduce the intensity or the severity of the flu that you may get, but it's not going to be a 100% protective thing. And the reason why it can't be is because the antigens on the common cold virus change frequently. Why isn't it chat for 27? Item 28 refers to the following diagram of a potato plant, right? So potato being starchy, very good example of those complex carbs. So it says which part of the plant contains the most starch? Nice, glad to see you all understanding. So I've seen C's in the chat. We're all in agreement with this one. That is going to be C, the actual tuber, right? So the tuber is the storage organ. So when the plant photosynthesizes and it makes a whole bunch of glucose, it doesn't need all of that glucose right now. So what it does is that it stores, it's transported to the root and stored as this tuber. So it's the storage organ. It's going to be stored as starch, which is why we know potato, fries, etc. to be very starchy foods, because it is the storage organ in the plant, right? So that is there for the rainy day for the plant. So if ever conditions were to change, if there's a drought, if the place is very overcast, the plant can't photosynthesize for a while, it is going to be able to break down the starch in the tuber back into glucose and use it for respiration. But instead, all you like Kentucky Fried Chicken, all you like fries, you like mashed potato, you like scalloped potato, you like what are different? There's a whole bunch of different ways you could cook potato, but you all like potatoes so much that you have people digging up the plant rainy day fund for your belly, because all of you all are big backs, all of you. So because of that, we dig up the storage organ of the potato plant for our licorishness instead, right? But again, because that is the storage organ for the potato plant, it is where the most starch can be found, right? So the answer for 28 is C. Under which conditions will the rate of transpiration in plants be highest? So they put the highest in capital letters, right? So is it going to be sunny and low wind speed, sunny and high wind speed, cloudy and low wind speed, or cloudy and high wind speed? If it fall in your garden, Jude, if it fall in your garden. So everyone's saying that transpiration will be highest in the sunny and high wind speed, right? So what is transpiration? Transpiration is when we have water evaporating from the cells in the leaf into the air spaces inside of the leaf. So it increases the humidity or the amount of water vapor in the air spaces within the leaf. And then that diffuses out of the leaf through the stomata, right? So it is the way that the plant loses water in this way, right? Now, so that is transpiration. What are some conditions that would make it easier for this process to happen? If it's sunny, the place is warmer. sunny is going to equal to an increase in temperature, which is going to equal to an increase in the evaporation of water. So you're going to have increased evaporation of water from the cells in the leaf, and you're also going to have an increase in diffusion of that water vapor out of the leaf, right? So sunny is definitely going to increase transpiration. Then the next thing is that when that water vapor diffuses out of the leaf, the air right around the leaves can increase in humidity, as in water vapor is continuously being added to the air right around the plant because it's diffusing out of the leaf. So as that starts to happen, if the water vapor is leaving the leaf via diffusion, diffusion is about differences in concentration. You will have diffusion from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, right? So this is higher concentration. The humidity levels are in higher concentration in the airspace in the leaf, lower in the air surrounding the leaf. But as that is happening, the amount of water vapor in surrounding the leaf is building up and decreasing the difference in the concentration levels, which means that transpiration should slow down. But then comes the wind to blow away all of that humid air that surrounds the plant, dropping humidity levels, increasing the difference in concentration between humidity levels in the leaf versus surrounding the leaf, and that is going to keep transpiration rates high. So that's why high wind speed and sunny conditions will result in the highest rates of transpiration. Why is in the chat? Coming on to 30. Which of the following substances is removed during egestion? Egestion. Which one is removed during egestion? Judy, you meant to say 29? It's going to be D, undigested food. Egestion, by definition, is the removal of undigested food from the alimentary canal, right? Or your digestive tract, right? The rest of them will be what other process that people tend to confuse with egestion? The rest are excretion. Excretion is getting rid of metabolic waste produced from chemical reactions or metabolic reactions within the body, right? So 31, which of the following processes is not a form of excretion in plants? You have substances being stored in the bark of a tree, water vapor diffusing out through the epidermis, carbon dioxide diffusing in through the stomata, or calcium oxalate crystals being stored in leaves during leaf fall. You all play nice in the chat. But it is going to be C, right? So it's going to be C. Excretion, as we just defined, is the removal of metabolic waste or toxic waste produced as a result of chemical reactions occurring within the body, right? So it is getting rid of, we want these things getting out, right? We have carbon dioxide diffusing in, is in the wrong, we're moving in the wrong direction here. So the correct answer here is going to be C, right? All the others are different ways in which the plant gets rid of toxic waste, right? 32. Which of the following changes in the concentration of substances is most likely to occur in the blood of a person who suffers from kidney disease? Right? Is it that we will end up with an increase in urea, a decrease in urea, an increase in glucose, or a decrease in glucose? It's going to be A. So the kidneys are our main excretory organs, right? And it is largely responsible for getting rid of the urea, right? So if the person has kidney disease, which means the kidney and the nephrons are not filtering the blood properly, you're not going to be getting that urea moving from the blood into the filtrate, right? So because it's not leaving the blood, because the answer says in the blood, the most likely to occur in the blood, what will happen in the blood is that we have an increase in urea. What we would have in the urine would be a decrease in urea, right? But again, because the question asks what happens in the blood, we pick A, an increase in urea. C and D is just a trick because most times when they ask about kidney and what is not supposed to be in the blood, they're leaning towards diabetes and the presence of glucose in the blood. So C and D was just there to try and trick you up, but they focus on kidney disease and not diabetes. So we're not focusing on glucose here, right? Which of the following correctly describes movement in plants, right? We have growth movement, part movement, or whole body movement, right? Is it going to be 1 only, 1 and 2 only, 2 and 3 only, or 1, 2, and 3? Right? Everyone saying B for this one, 1 and 2 only. And I agree, right? Plants respond via growth movements or tropisms, right? So plants exhibit tropisms, which is growth movements, right? And that only happens in part of the body, right? So if they have to respond to light, they have to grow towards light. If they have to respond to gravity, they have to grow towards or in the direction or under the influence of gravity. And that happens in different parts of the plant, right? So they aren't able to move their whole body at the same time. So 1 and 2 only is going to be the correct answer for this question. Matthew, you have a follow-up question there? In humans, the skeletal system performs a variety of functions, including, is it mastication, hormone formation, the immune response, or blood cell formation? Blood cell formation. You don't understand the last one, which is what? The one on movement in plants. This is the plant itself moving. So it's not like a plant swaying in the breeze, being moved by the wind. We're talking about the plant itself being able to move. The plant itself cannot move its entire structure at the same time. The way in which I can move my whole body because I want to, I can dance and telele. A plant cannot do that. It could be blown by the wind, but itself, it cannot create movement in the entire plant, right? So that's the difference there. So this question, in humans, the skeletal system performs a variety of functions, including, it means that of this list, 1 is going to be accurate and 3 will be inaccurate. Right? And one of the functions of your skeletal system is the production of your blood cells in the bone marrow of your long bones. Right? So D is going to be the correct answer here. The bones itself don't secrete hormones, so they don't do hormone formation. Mastication is done by the teeth, not the bone. The immune response is done by different cells belonging to your immune system. Now, some of those cells can be formed in the bone marrow, but it's the skeleton's job to form the cells, and then the immune system coordinates the immune response, right? Not the skeleton itself. 35, locomotion is an evolutionary adaptation performed by animals. Locomotion is what again, guys? Locomotion is movement with displacement, meaning that you can move from one position to another position, like your entire body can move from one place to the next, right? So that's movement with displacement. That's locomotion. So this is an evolutionary adaptation performed by animals that plants did not get the memo, right? What advantages does this mechanism have over the type of movement that occurs in plants? So clearly plants don't exhibit locomotion, right? So 1, the ability to move to favorable conditions. 2, increases chances of predator attacks. 3, the ability to find food. Naria coming first in with C. She says 2 and 3, right? We have B coming in as well. 1 and 3. So we agree that the ability to find food is 1, whether it's 1 and 3 or 2 and 3. I seen A has entered the chat. A is 1 and 2. So you all say 1, 2, and 3. The chat is unstable at this time, right? We are not in agreement. So let's think about it. The ability to move from one place to the next, to move to favorable conditions. If you are sitting down outside and it starts to rain, you can get up and go inside, right? Humans are animals, so we are a prime example. So we could move to favorable conditions. If it is, so 2 says increases chances of predator attacks, right? If I'm sitting outside in my yard and my neighbor pit bull get loose, I am running, right? I will forget. I know what all the advice says, stop, stay still, stand strong, and say no in a strong voice. No, my inner Usain Bolt activates and I'm out of there, right? So my ability to move, to exhibit locomotion, is going to reduce my chances of predator attacks, not increase, right? So 2 is out. So that means any option, Miss Pelter Stone, my aim not so good, right? I am running. Okay. Anyway, so any option with 2 is going to be out. So that takes out A, it takes out C, it takes out D. So that is going to leave us with B as being the only correct answer, right? This one is an interesting one. Item 36 refers to the following diagrams illustrating the steps involved in an experiment, right? So we have 4 different chutes, right? In this one, the chute is covered with a foil cap. In the second one, the tip is removed, it's cut off. The tip of the chute is cut off. In 3, the chute is undisturbed, it's left as is. And then in 4, a transparent cap is placed over the tip of the chute, right? And then with each of these, the chute is exposed to light, right? So we have different manipulations. Now, what happens? So 36 says, after a few days, the tallest chute would most likely be, is it 1, 2, 3, or 4, right? Now, what happens to the tip? Now, plants grow, or they respond via growth movements, right? And growth in plants are limited to particular regions called meristems, which is why they could only exhibit part movements, because there are very narrow ranges where they can grow, and that is in the meristematic regions, or where there's a meristem, right? So the tip of a shoot will have a meristem, right? Cells that are actively dividing to create new cells and to facilitate growth, because growth is an increase in the size of cells and an increase in the number of cells. That's the definition for growth, right? Now, what influences the rate at which that happens is a plant hormone called auxin, right? And auxins are found to the tip in that meristematic region. Auxins tend to collect on the shaded side of the tip, right? So for example, because light is coming at an angle from this way, right, auxins will tend to collect on the other side of the shoot, promoting growth in that region. So if it collects on this side of the shoot, it will cause more growth in this region and the plant will grow towards the light. Right? That's how that works. Now, with the foil cap over the shoot, we are blocking light from the tip. With the tip being removed, we cut off the tip, we cut off the meristem, we cut off, so the auxin is gone as well. 3, it's undisturbed. And 4, everything is in place, but we have that transparent cap, but the cap is allowing the light to pass through. So it would be, the auxins would be able to respond to the light, right? So we're there now. With all of that being said, they said which shoot would be the tallest. So really and truly, the answer is going to come down between A and C, which is where I see the majority of you are in the chat, right? Now, the thing is, in addition to this, in addition to where the auxin distributes and influences growth, when plants are in a shaded region, or they are blocked from access to light, they tend to have a period of rapid growth as they're trying to grow taller in hopes of finding the light, right? So that period or that phenomenon where you have a rapid growth in search of light when it's blocked is called attenuation. So because of that, that would happen because the foil cap is completely blocking the light. So we would expect the most growth to come from A, where the foil cap, because of that, so those two things, the auxin is still there, the auxin is evenly distributed, and you would have growth straight up. Whereas in 3, you don't have any manipulation. However, the shoot will grow towards light. So it will bend and grow towards light. So if it's bent, it's going to affect the total height of the plant, right? So the answer for this question is A. Why isn't it, chat? So because they came down to ask about tallest, the correct answer is A. 37. Which of the following options best describes the terms stimulus and response, right? So we have stimulus and we have response. So which one is accurate? So we have A, we have D. So stimulus, a deliberate provocation of an organism. Now, that can be a stimulus for sure, right? I mean, like if somebody come up and slap you, right? That is a deliberate provocation. You can realize that you were slapped and you may want to respond, right? And they have response as the movement of an organism. What is going to be your movement in response? By the way, I do not condone violence, right? This is not condoning of violence. I'm just saying that could be a deliberate provocation and a response may or may not happen, right? So that is okay. It's not wrong, but it's very specific examples of what a stimulus and response can be. So will it be the best terms to describe it? No. It's okay, but it's not the best one. Let's see what else is there. So I see some of you mentioning C. Stimulus is a wave of excitement in an organism, and response is locomotion of an organism. Locomotion can be a response, but it's just one particular example of a response. Remember, locomotion is movement with displacement. But irritability, which is one of the characteristics of living things, or sensitivity as it's sometimes referred to, is that it's the ability of an organism to detect changes in its environment and respond to it, which means that all living things should be able to detect stimuli and respond. So locomotion is going to narrow it only to animals, but plants are living things too. So then let's look at D. Not the talking catching up to me. So D says that stimulus is a detectable change in an organism's environment, right? So that is being able to detect a change, whether it was a deliberate change, an accidental change, a subtle change, a dramatic change. Once there is change, it is the organism's ability to detect that change, right? So that's giving good for stimulus. It's going to cover all circumstances. And then response is going to be an organism's reaction to stimulus, right? Which covers all circumstances. Again, response could be a slap back. Response could be the release of a hormone. Response could be scratching your nose. So again, it could encapsulate any of the options. So D is going to be the best for describing the terms. Why isn't it, chat? A definition is going to be true in all circumstances. So now let's link stimulus to response. Bye, Matthew. Item 38 refers to the following diagram of a reflex arc. So it says, 38 says, which label structure relays the impulse to an effector? Is it going to be A, B, C, or D? I feel at this point it's going to be very important that we figure out what these structures are. So A is going to be pointing to what? In the chat. We don't have a date for the next session yet, Matthew. We have to postpone next week, so I'm not too sure when it's going to be just yet. So everyone is saying C, right? That C would be conducting, relays the impulse to an effector. So I agree, that is C. But you know, we're here to learn around the question. So what is C? No, I am fighting for my life with this cough. But I'm trying to not let it stop me. It's going to be a specific type of neuron. C is this long structure here. I feel like this is the muscle. This is the muscle, which is the effector. So I think that we don't really have the idea here. So let's jump into it, right? So the effector here is the muscle, and C is bringing the impulse to the muscle. So that's going to make C the, as Jamia says, that's going to make C the motor neuron. Right? So how does a reflex arc work? So this is what links the stimulus to the response. Right? So let's figure out all these steps. There is going to be a stimulus, which is a change in the environment as we just defined. In order for organisms to be able to detect the stimulus, they must have a receptor, which is what A is going to be. The receptor is going to be able to detect the change and then send a message to your CNS, which is your brain and spinal cord. So the receptor is going to generate an electrical impulse, a message that's going to be sent to the CNS via your sensory neuron. So D is pointing to the cell body or the soma of the sensory neuron. That takes the impulse from the receptor to the CNS. So this diagram showing you, this is your spinal cord, right? Which is part of the CNS. The CNS is your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. The rest of your nervous system will be the peripheral nervous system. That it will be all of the bundles of nerves that branch from the brain and spinal cord. So B is going to be pointing to a neuron within the CNS, and the neurons within the CNS will be your interneurons or your relay neurons, as they could be referred to as well. Right? So that's what B is pointing to. So B conducts electrical impulses within the spinal cord, CNS. And then we have C, which is bringing the impulse. So the CNS makes a decision. C is going to then bring the impulse from the CNS to the effector. So that's going to be a motor neuron. And then the impulse will arrive as the effector. Effectors can be muscles or glands. So you can tell a muscle to contract or a gland to release or a gland to release a hormone, right? So the muscle, whether the muscle contracts or a hormone is released, that brings about a response. So that is how we get a response based on the stimulus. Nathaniel, there are only 2 likes. Guys, if it is that you're learning stuff, if it's being beneficial, like the live, like it, share it, right? So why isn't it? We understand why C is the correct answer. So we have stimulus, then receptor, then sensory neuron, then the interneurons within the CNS, then you have your motor neuron, your effector, that brings about the response. Item 39, still testing the same thing, right? So they're giving you a spinal reflex. So you have spinal reflexes and cranial reflexes. Spinal reflexes will involve the spinal cord. Cranial reflexes will involve the brain. And a reflex will be is an automatic sequence of events. It's an automatic sequence of actions. You don't have to learn a reflex. You come pre-programmed with it, right? So item 29 refers to the following diagram of your spinal reflex. The numbered structures are, so you have skin on the hand, and then you have bicep muscle. So we have structures 1, 2, and 3. I want to see what your thoughts are on this one. Nishana is saying C. Jude is between C and D. Right? So we're looking good there. So let's see what C works out to be. Right? The skin of the hand is going to contain receptors, right? Right? So then we want to take the impulse from the receptor in the skin of the hand to the spinal cord, which is part of the CNS. So we know that the sensory neuron is going to do that. So that would make 2 the sensory neuron. Then 3 is within the spinal cord, so that would be a relay or interneuron. And then the spinal cord will make a decision that will then be sent to the bicep muscle. It's going to be the effector. So that would make 1 the motor neuron. So therefore, that's looking at C. We have 1 as the motor neuron, 2 as the sensory neuron, 3 as the relay neuron. The correct answer here is C. Why isn't it, child? So between C and D, they just have 2 of them. Whether it's the sensory neuron or the relay neuron for 2 and 3, it has that mixed up. But 3 being within the CNS, that's definitely going to be the relay neuron or the interneuron. Item 40 refers to the following diagram, which shows nearsightedness in an eye, right? Which of the following shows how the defect can be corrected? So how do we correct nearsightedness? Nearsightedness, which the technical name for that is myopia. So in some questions, they could use the technical term for it as well. So the issue that we have in here is that the image is forming. The image forms in front the retina when we need it to form on the retina for a clear image to be generated. So because the image is forming in front of the retina and not on the retina itself, it means that the image is going to be blurry. So how can we correct this defect? Are we going to need a diverging lens or a converging lens? Jude says A. Any support? We have some A's, we have some B's. So if the image is focusing in front of the retina, it means that they're meeting too quickly. right? So we would want to put a lens in the front that would widen the light rays a bit so that they will meet further back instead of where they're meeting in front. So we want to move where it's focusing further back to on the retina, right? So we would want to widen or diverge the light rays before so that it will focus on the retina instead of in front of the retina. So we're going to need diverging lens, which will bend the light rays outwards before entering the eye, because right now it is bending too much and focusing in front of the retina. So A is the correct answer, right? So a diverging lens will be your biconcave lens. So your biconcave lens will look something like this, right? And you would use that to diverge the light rays so that it would focus on the retina instead of in front of the retina. Right? So that is where a little physics comes into the bio as well. So we have a little chemistry at times, a little bio, a little physics. We have a lot of bio in bio. Lol. Right? 41. The statements below describe the processes taking place within a seed during germination. Right? We have 1, the embryo uses food to develop the radicle and the plumule. 2, enzymes break down proteins into amino acids. And 3, soluble products move into the embryo. It says, which of the following sequences of events occurs during the germination of the seed? So what's going to be the correct order here? So most times seeds will be dormant, right? And you're going to need warmth and you're going to need water to move into the seed to activate the enzymes. And the enzymes are going to need warmth because enzymes like warmth, a warm environment to work in, right? We know that temperature increases the activity of enzyme catalyzed reactions. So we need the enzymes to break down the food stores. So we're going to start here with the enzymes break down the protein stored into the amino acid. So we're going to start with that first, right? Then once we have the complex proteins broken down into the soluble amino acids, we want those soluble products to move into the embryo, right? Then once we have the soluble products move into the embryo, then the embryo can make use of it for the growth of the baby root and the baby shoot, right? So the 2, then 3, then 1. 2, then 3, and 1, that gives us D. Why is in the chat? I've seen a lot of C in the chat. Let's see what he's saying. 2, the enzymes break down the amino acids, right? But how can it make use of the food before it moves into the embryo? Right? So it's 2, then 3, then 1. Item 42 refers to the following unlabeled graph, which illustrates a measurement of growth in living organisms. Which of the following labels would be incorrect on the y-axis? Is it mass? Is it length? Is it units of time? Is it number of leaves? No matter what, this parameter here could be anything. Well, not anything. Many things, right? But it's always going to be time on the x-axis and different growth parameters you can use on the y. You could use mass, you could use length, you could use number of leaves on the y, but time must always be on the x. So that's why time could never be on the y-axis, and that would make C the correct answer here, right? And now check the time. We're well liming here. Mr. Springer going to come back and be like, Akili, let my people go. So let's hurry it up, right? Because I want to get to number 60 today. Which row in the following table correctly states the cause, treatment, control, and prevention of the disease AIDS? Right? I'm not going to read through the options here, but let me know what you think. So AIDS develops from an HIV infection, right? HIV is an RNA virus, and you can use antiretrovirals in order to treat an HIV infection, because what happens, viruses are not living, they're not cells, they're not living things. However, they are particles that can infect human cells, hijack human cell machinery to make more copies of itself in a process called replication. So what we can use is those antiretroviral drugs, such as AZT, in order to be able to stop the replication of the HIV virus, because the more HIV virus or the higher viral load a person has in their system, the greater the chance, the more damage ensues, and the greater the chance of the development of AIDS, right? Control will be monogamy, having one sexual partner, and prevention, abstinence. So A is going to be the best answer here, because one, from the jump, the causative agent, it's the only one with an RNA virus, right? That question a little sticky though, because, you know, AIDS is the development of HIV, but we don't consider AIDS to be an infectious disease, right? So little sticky, but we understand where they were coming from, right? Item 44 refers to the following diagrams of flowers labeled 1 and 2 from 2 different types of plants, right? Which of the following statements is true for both flowers? Is it that both are wind pollinated, that that petals are petals are absent from both 1 and 2, that both are pollinated by a hummingbird, or that 1 is pollinated by the wind while 2 is pollinated by the hummingbird? All right, so I've seen these coming in, and I agree. One is looking like a wind-pollinated flower, and the second is looking like an animal-pollinated flower, right? And here are the distinguishing features. We're seeing the feathery stigma. The stigma in wind-pollinated flowers tend to be more flowery so that it could catch wind and catch the pollen in the wind. The anthers tend to be on long, dangly filaments to hang it outside of the flower. So as the mature pollen is released, it can be blown away by the wind, right? Whereas your animal pollinated flowers don't tend to have feathery stigmas or dangly anthers outside of the flower. Those structures tend to be within the flower, and it produces nectar at the base in order to attract the animals to come in to the flower itself, where the stigma and the anther would be, right? And they tend to have brightly colored petals, which tend to be scented at times, and most importantly, they produce nectar, which is the reward for the animals, insects, birds coming to visit the flower and carrying out the pollination process by accident, basically, right? So that is D, as you all said. 45, this one comes with knowledge of the female reproductive system and the menstrual cycle. Item 45 refers to the following activities involved in the menstrual cycle. We have 1, the repair of the uterine lining, 2, ovulation, 3, shedding of the uterine lining, and 4, development of the Graafian follicle. So the 45 says, which of the following sequences show the correct order of activities? This paper, they real focus on processes, boy. So far, see D come in, right? So that's development of the Graafian follicle followed by shedding of the uterine lining. Now, the Graafian follicle is the structure that is mature, that when you have a spike in the luteinizing hormone, that is going to rupture and release the secondary oocyte into the fallopian tube. If we have that happening, which is ovulation, we want the uterine lining to be nice and thick and ready to accommodate the implantation of that possibly fertilized gamete, right? So after the development of the Graafian follicle, we do not then want to be shedding the uterine lining. So that would take D out of the running. All right, so we propose C. C says development of the Graafian follicle, repair of the uterine lining, right? So we want the lining to be repaired and building up, right? 2, then we have ovulation, and 3, after ovulation, then we can have shedding of the uterine lining. So I agree, C is going to be the best sequence of events. Let's link that again. The development of the Graafian follicle happens in the first half of the menstrual cycle, right? So that's going to be in the follicular phase, where your primary follicles develop into the Graafian follicle. In that, you would have so basically the shedding of the uterine lining would have happened before the development of the Graafian follicle. So if we had an option with 3 before 4, we could have entertained it, right? But we're starting the development of the Graafian follicle. Then we have repair of the uterine lining, which happens after the shedding. So it starts to build back up. So as the Graafian follicle is developing, it releases estrogen. Estrogen tells the lining of your, yes, easy answer. That's the one I shaded, right? The estrogen produced from the Graafian follicle in development tells the lining of your uterus to thicken, to prepare, right? So it encourages the repair and thickening of the uterine lining. Then you have the surge of luteinizing hormone, which triggers the rupturing of the Graafian follicle, releasing the gamete, the secondary oocyte, into the fallopian tube, which brings us to 2. So we went from 4 to 1, then to 2. And then once we have the release of the gamete into the fallopian tube, the secondary oocyte, what happens is if that secondary oocyte is never fertilized, it simply passes out of the female reproductive system, and then the drop in progesterone would result in the shedding of the uterine lining, which begins the next cycle, right? So the correct order here is 4, 1, 2, 3. So C being the correct answer. Yeah, you had to get used to those hormones and what they do, what's making it, and where it's released, and what it makes happen. Okay. Item 46 refers to the following diagram of specialized cells labeled 1 and 2. Which of the following structures is common to both cells? They definitely both have a nucleus, right? So this is showing your reproductive cells. In humans, it's showing the egg cell, which is the sperm cell. They both have nuclei. They don't both have an acrosome. They don't both have cell wall. They don't both have cilium. So the correct answer here is B, the nucleus, right? Item 47, zoom out a little bit, coming back to the flower again. Item 47 refers to the following diagram of a flower. The powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria, right? Which was not an option there. Yeah, I'm just making a note on that. Item 47 refers to the following diagram of a flower. Which of the labeled parts is responsible for the production of the male gametes? That's going to be B. B is D. So focusing here on male gametes, because if they had asked female gametes, it would have been C instead, right? So 2 is pointing to the anther. 1 is pointing to what structure? Stigma. 3 is pointing to the, yes, I'm having a good afternoon. Doing what I love. 3 is pointing to the ovule, and 4 is pointing to the receptacle, right? So I'm trying to say one time, I know Mrs. Springer going to come back and correlate me. Which of the following are used in the management of diabetes, right? We have diet, we have exercise, we have medication. Do we use diet, dietary changes, changes in the level of exercise, medication? I've seen B, I've seen D, right? If you have diabetes, you need to watch your intake of them sugars, right? So if you consuming your carbs, it should be complex carbs rather than simple carbs, but still you have to watch the amount of carbs because those complex carbs still get digested into the simple carbs eventually. You want to increase your physical exercise, and sometimes if it is diet and exercise alone can't work, doctors can also prescribe medication. So it's going to be D, all three for the management of diabetes. 49, a vector is defined as an organism. It's defined as an organism that transmits disease organisms, that lives on other organisms, causes diseases, or bites humans. So some of them can bite humans, but that's not what makes them a vector. Like mosquitoes, them female mosquitoes be attacking at dusk and dawn. But it is going to be, the definition for a vector is going to be an organism that transmits disease-causing organisms or pathogens. So it's just the vehicles for the disease-causing organism itself, which is the pathogen, right? So C is pathogen and not the vector, the vehicles that bring the pathogen to the host. Item 50 refers to the following diagram, which shows the life cycle of a vector with stages labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. At which stage is this vector easily controlled by the use of aerosol insecticides? When you pull out your buck, your Protex, Fish, King. Those are the brands that are coming to mind. We're not sponsored by none of them, though. At what stage in the life cycle? Pyro is going to be D, the adult stage, right? So could you give me the stages in order? So 4 is the adult. We start with D. Start with the eggs. Then we have the larvae. Then we have the pupae. Then we have the adult, right? But the aerosol insecticides you're going to use for the adult. If we had to get rid of it at the egg stage, we'd want to remove breeding sites, right? So we would want to remove containers that could collect stagnant water. We just want to reduce the amount of available breeding sites for the mosquito. For the larval stage and pupa stage, the control can happen the same way. We can introduce natural predators to the aquatic system. Or we could cover the surface in oil. Because even though they're in water, they still come to the surface to access air for respiration, right? So therefore, if you put a layer of oil, no access to the atmosphere, they die, right? If you empty the water container, they will desiccate as well. So you have all of those options for controlling the water stages or the aquatic stages, which would be 2 and 3, right? 51, which of the following descriptions best define a chromosome, right? Is it 2 forms of the same gene, structure made up of DNA wrapped around histones, nucleic acids that contain all genetic information, or part of the DNA which carries genetic information to produce a protein? So I see the first answer coming in with B, right? So we think that it's a structure made up of DNA wrapped around histone proteins. That is true. That's going to define a chromosome. 2 forms of the same gene describes an allele. Nucleic acids that contain all the genetic information, that's giving genome. part of the DNA which carries genetic information to produce a protein, that's giving gene, right? So B, structure made up of DNA wrapped around histone proteins, is the best definition for a chromosome. Which of the following is not a characteristic of meiosis? Is it maintenance of the diploid number, genetic recombination of alleles, crossing over of chromosomes, or random assortment of genes? Which one is not a characteristic of meiosis? Meiosis is all about halving that diploid number to the haploid number. So it is about reduction from diploid to haploid. So it does not maintain the diploid number in the gamete or what is produced from meiosis. Now, the fact that meiosis does produce haploid gametes overall would lead to the maintenance of the diploid number within the species, but for the specific meiotic event, it does not maintain the diploid number. Mitosis would do that because it produces identical copies of the parent cell, right? So the answer for this one is A, right? Crossing over of chromosomes occurs in prophase 1 of meiosis. Random assortment of genes happens in metaphase 1 of meiosis. So those happen genetic recombination of alleles. Because it increases variation, it reshuffles the alleles that are inherited together. So the correct answer here is A. Why isn't it, Chad? Yeah, questions? I seen, oh my God, really? What's the question? It does change grouping of alleles that are inherited together, which is B. It does facilitate crossing over of chromosomes, particularly homologous chromosomes, during prophase 1 of meiosis, and random assortment of genes does occur in metaphase 1. So the answer there is A. 53. Tarzan and Jane are heterozygous for blood groups A and B, respectively. Which of the following shows all the possible results of their genetic cross? Is it going to be A, 100% AB, B, 50% A, 50% AB, C, 25% AB, 50% B, 25% O, or D, 25% A, 25% B, 25% AB, and 25% O? So firstly, we need to know what that word means. What do they mean heterozygous for blood groups A and B? It means that they are genotypically AO and BO. So if we cross two individuals that are genotype AO and BO, let's put it in the Punnett square. When in doubt, pull out the Punnett square, right? You can get an individual that is, you have a 25% chance of getting an individual that is AB, an individual that is BO, an individual that is AO, and an individual that is OO, which is giving 25% chance of each of these. G, Adam? Right, so it's going to be D. Why is it chat we follow? Yeah, if they were homozygous for blood groups A and B, then the answer, if it was AA by BB, then the answer would be A. No, you said G. Glad to have you here, Adam, and you're welcome to try and attempt, but you just put G in the chat now. It was A, B, C, or D. I think it was a typo, so that's why I chuckled. Yeah? Which of the following terms Welcome. It's good that you have interest so early, so you'll mash them up in exams by the time you get to Form 5 or whenever you decide to write. Which of the following terms refers to visible characteristics of living things? Is it the gene, genotype, phenotype, or the chromosome? It's going to be C, the phenotype, right? Which most times tends to be based on your genotype. So based on what alleles you have, your genotype, it can then result in your phenotype, right? Let's look to 55. Albinism is caused by a recessive allele. So what does that mean? Recessive allele means that you have to have 2 copies of the allele to express the associated condition. 2 normal parents produce an albino child. This is because both parents were homozygous recessive, both parents were heterozygous for the gene, one parent was homozygous dominant for the trait and the other heterozygous, or that one parent was homozygous dominant for the trait and the other homozygous recessive. What do we think for this one? The chat quiet. All right. So you want me to talk through this one, right? So albinism is caused by a recessive allele, which means that you're going to have one dominant allele. So let's say big A codes for your normal allele, and small a, the recessive allele, is going to lead to albinism, right? If both parents are normal, but they have the ability to have a child, so that means to be an albino, you have to be genotype small a, small a. If both parents are normal, but they are able to have a child with albinism, it means that they both have to have that small a allele to give, which means that both parents need to be heterozygous at this gene, which means that they have to have a normal allele to be able to be normal, but they have to still have that recessive allele to be able to pass on. So if both of them are heterozygous, when we put that in the Punnett square, big A, small a, big A, small a, and we work out all the possibilities, they have a 25% chance, 1 in 4, or a 25% chance of having an albino child. Yeah, so they are phenotypically normal, but they are carriers. They don't express the condition, but they are carrying the allele that can lead to it. And if 2 of those alleles comes together, then they can have a child with the condition. One example of a sex-linked disease is it cancer, hypertension, color blindness, or Down syndrome? Sex-linked means that the affected allele is found on the sex chromosomes. So remember, we have 46 chromosomes in our nucleus. We have 23 pairs. 22 of those pairs are autosomes. They are non-sex chromosomes. But that 23rd pair, those are your sex chromosomes. If you are XX, female, XY, male, right? And because the male Y chromosome is significantly shorter than the X chromosome, males only have 1 copy of all of the genes on the X chromosome, while females have 2 copies of all of the genes on the X chromosomes, which, because of that, it makes it more likely that if there are the recessive or defective alleles, there's a higher likelihood or chance for males to express those conditions than females. Right? So in terms of the listed conditions here, cancer, hypertension, color blindness, and Down syndrome, the example of a sex-linked condition that you would have learned would have been color blindness, and you also learn hemophilia as well. Right? 57. Variation in populations is due to, is it mutation, crossing over, or asexual reproduction? We have 1, 2, and 3. Is it 1 and 2 only, 1 and 3 only, 2 and 3 only, or 1, 2, and 3? We have A, so we've seen A, I've seen B, right? So variation means changes, right? Mutation occurs in both meiosis and mitosis, so it's the creation of new alleles. That is definitely going to lead to variation. Crossing over happens in meiosis. That produces variations. It's a reshuffling of existing alleles. Asexual reproduction happens via mitosis, and mitosis is a photocopying machine producing clones or identical copies. So that would not contribute to variation. So 3 is out. Any option with 3 is out. That means the only correct answer here is A, 1 and 2 only. Wise? '58, a group of closely related organisms that are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring is called a, so we say closely related, ability to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. It's the hallmarks and key points in the definition of a species. Niche is going to be the role the organism plays. Population will be a number of organisms belonging to the same species living in the same geographical area. And community will be a number of different species living in the same geographical area, right? So B is species. 59, which of the following descriptions is true about natural and artificial selection? Justin said he fed up any definition, but he wouldn't make a mistake with it now, so that's good. So this question is focusing on the differences between natural selection and artificial selection, right? So natural selection is about selection for best for survival, right? Whereas artificial selection is based on desirable characteristics important to man. Right? So one is a natural process and one is a process where man intervenes. Right? I always like to tell the story about, I have a golden retriever, Chloe. I love that dog, right? She is so loving. She's so good with the kids. But I know for a fact, if Chloe was ever to be released into the wild, she will be dead in minutes, right? She has the survival instinct of a plate, right? She cannot hunt and gather food. I don't think she can cross the road. If she gets lost, she's not finding her way home. But I have a husky. You come 5 minutes late and she is going to hunt a bird, right? You let her go, she will come back home, right? She will survive. Stella will survive. Chloe, But golden retrievers have been artificially selected for their loving, calm, beautiful exterior. So those are characteristics important to man. That's artificial selection. So it means that natural selection, it produces great biological diversity because it's always going to allow for variation, and variation is the playground for natural selection, right? So natural selection produces great biological diversity, and artificial selection, where individuals are crossed for their specific desirable characteristics to man, not necessarily for survival. It may be for economic profit, right? It produces very different organisms from the natural population because it's not being selected for survival, but it may be selected for dollars and cents. So C is going to be the correct answer here. It does not. So natural selection is wild population, involves genetic modification. It does not. It's a faster process. No, it's a slower process, right? So it's basically all the opposites. C is the only option there. And 60 for our last and final question. Let me zoom out so you can see all of it. The question is quite easy, but the process might be a little complicated. So item 60 refers to the following diagram, which shows stages 1 to 4 in the production of insulin through genetic engineering. And the question says, in which of the stages above can insulin be produced by the bacterium? The answer here is going to be we have one person saying C in the chat, but that's real slow. For the others, you don't have an opinion here. We have some people saying D. So what is happening here, right? So let's go through the process so that you kind of have some understanding on it. And then we will see what the correct answer is, right? So I'm seeing C and I'm seeing most people saying D in the chat. So what happens is that we want to get bacterial cells to make human insulin. So what we do is that we go into the nucleus, we identify or extract, we isolate the human insulin gene. Right? Because we want the bacterium to make human insulin. Bacteria have chromosomes, but they also have tiny rings of DNA called plasmids, and they have really many of them. So what we can do is that we can isolate or remove the plasmid from the bacterium. And what we do is that we digest with a restriction enzyme. A restriction enzyme is what we call it molecular scissors, right? Which means that restriction enzymes naturally exist because it was a defense mechanism by bacteria to prevent being infected by something called bacteriophages. So it basically just cuts up DNA. But scientists realized that, okay, we could get it to cut up DNA in a way that we want, right? So we kind of hijack the natural process and use it for our benefit. So what we do is that we cut the plasmid and we cut out the gene of interest using the same restriction enzyme, which means that it's going to cause the ends to match. Then we use another enzyme called ligase to join the two of them together to form what we call a recombinant plasmid. And it's recombinant because it has both human and bacterial DNA. So now we have the bacterial plasmid with the human insulin gene inserted. Then we need to get this recombinant plasmid back into the bacterium, and that is done via a process called transformation. There are different ways in which to do that, but the goal is to get the plasmid back into the bacterium. Now, once in stage 4, where the recombinant plasmid with the human insulin gene is now inside the bacterium, we could culture the bacterium so that, because bacteria reproduces really quickly. So as bacteria reproduce, they're going to also be reproducing that recombinant plasmid inside of it. So we're going to get more bacterial cells with more copies of the human insulin gene, and all of these bacterial cells will be able to produce the human insulin, right? So then we culture, increase the population of the human insulin gene carrying bacteria, and then we could simply after a while extract and purify the human insulin and package it for use by your diabetics. So the stage at which insulin can be produced by the bacterium is going to be in stage 4 when we get that recombinant plasmid back into the bacterium. Why isn't that, if that makes sense? That brings us to question 60, the end of this paper. I do hope that you found these 2 sessions beneficial. I'm not too sure when my next live session will be, but keep posted and I will let you guys know. I love doing this. My name is Miss Akili Joseph, and I teach CSEC Biology, CSEC HSB, Cape Biology Unit 1 and Unit 2 here at the Student Hub. And I have ongoing classes. If you are interested, I'm preparing multiple classes for May-June exams. So if you're interested, be sure to reach out to an admin at the number listed below, which is 310-1306, well, 868 if you're not from Trinidad. You can join my classes or just look out for more free content from me on the Student Hub and Mrs. Springer's pages and on the YouTube channels as well, right? See you guys next time, and all the best in your preparation. Looks like I'm not so cooked for bio.